Hey gang, Stephen Marshall, landlord-friendly here with a New Year's update. So got a lot going on in the rental industry, and you can be sure with the state legislature in session and a new urban county council in Lexington, there's going to be lots going on over the next several months. But the most important thing I wanted to update you on is that I learned this morning in court that Lexington's housing stabilization program has created a new settlement agreement for all rental assistance arrangements going forward in the city of Lexington. Now, this doesn't apply to the statewide Healthy at Home Eviction Relief Fund necessarily. I haven't heard about any changes with their program, but we'll let you know if I find out about one. But what Lexington has done after getting feedback from a number of us is that they have removed the waiting period from their settlement agreement. So previously, if you wanted to get rental assistance for your tenant, it came with a number of strings attached. And the most important was that once the money ran out, you had to wait 45 days before you could take any action. And then you had to give a 30-day notice to pay or vacate. And that 30-day notice requirement applied for 90 days. So that was a significant deterrent to a lot of you to keep you from entering into these agreements and accepting rental assistance, because you simply didn't want to wait another 2.5 months if your tenant stopped paying once the money ran out. So the new settlement agreement, which will apply going forward, it doesn't apply retroactively, but going forward, if you want to get rental assistance for your tenant, it does not have that waiting period. So if you get rental assistance, once that money runs out, you're just back to ground zero. You can, if the tenant doesn't start paying, you can give your usual notice, which is likely a 7-day notice to pay or vacate, just like you were if you'd never signed the agreement. Now, the agreement still requires that you waive any late fees, legal fees, penalties, interest, things like that in order to get the assistance money. So certainly if there's a tenant or tenants that you want to get rental assistance for, you want to get that process going as early as possible once the tenant becomes delinquent. It would not be optimal for you to get that process started on the day of court once you've already incurred legal fees, because you're not going to get reimbursed from those from the program. Now, you and the tenant can work something out separately where they pay those perhaps. But according to the agreement, you waive legal fees, late fees, penalties, and interest. That requirement is still in the agreement. But gone is the 45-day no action waiting period and then the 30-day notice requirement. So again, that's a significant improvement that should allow you to go after rental assistance for your tenants if you're inclined to keep them and if you want money instead of just wanting to get rid of your tenant. So I wanted to give you the update on that. Certainly if you have further questions, reach out to your friendly neighborhood attorney, and he or she will be glad to answer those questions for you about particular tenants. And again, remember, this applies only going forward and only applies to the Lexington Rental Assistance Program rather than the statewide Healthy at Home Fund. Again, the Healthy at Home Fund may have made changes. I'm just not aware of those changes. But Lexington has made those changes. Other issues in Lexington, we have a new council that's been seated with a number of new council members, many of whom do not project to be, based on their prior statements, friends of landlords. But always we want to wait and see how that goes. We want to talk to people and deal with them based upon their actions. But one of the things that we can certainly plan to have to deal with is this kind of umbrella term, the Tenant's Bill of Rights, and that includes a number of proposals that are going to go before the council in this upcoming term. Tenant's Bill of Rights, again, it's an umbrella term. It contains a number of proposals, one of which is making source of income a protected class in Lexington. That was done by local ordinance in Louisville, and many tenants' rights advocates want to see that done in Lexington. I've written a couple of articles on my website, kylandlordlaw.com, that deal with the Tenants' Bill of Rights proposal specifically and in depth. And if you're not familiar with that, make sure that you check out those articles. So I'm not going to do that now. But source of income as a protected class is one of their priorities. Providing tenants with an attorney in eviction court is another one of their priorities. Again, I don't think that's a good idea. I don't think that would be effective in addressing the concerns that actual tenants and tenants' right advocates and council members actually want to address. What do I think the solutions are? If you were able to hear some of the stories that were given to the council about tenants who were not done right by their landlords. You had a number of tenants who complained about subpar, faulty living conditions in buildings and houses and apartments that were not compliant with code. And certainly those issues need to be addressed. And the good news is that we have two mechanisms already in place that allow tenants and city government to address those situations. The first situation, or the first mechanism, the first remedy is that we have code enforcement, and we have a code that requires that buildings and houses and apartments be kept in certain conditions and meet certain standards. And when that's not done, the city has the ability to levy fines upon the property owner. If those fines aren't paid, then the city can actually condemn the building if it's in bad enough shape, or they can put a lien on the building. And once you have a lien on the building, then the city can foreclose on that lien and actually have the property sold to a new owner, potentially to a new owner. And so when we're talking about quote unquote slumlords and owners who are not taking care of their property to the detriment of their tenants, then that's a mechanism that the city needs to unleash to address those individual owners. Because what everybody knows is that's not a widespread problem. Okay, that's a small targeted problem that is created by a handful perhaps, of negligent rental owners. But nevertheless, no matter how many it is, whether it's 5, 10, or 100, the city has the ability under existing law to fine, to lien, and to foreclose upon those properties and have them sold to a new owner. So that's the first solution that really needs to be looked at by our urban county council. The second solution is in the hands of the tenant, and it exists under current law. Lexington has adopted the Uniform Residential Landlord-Tenant Act, and part of that act is KRS 383.595, and that sets forth the landlord's obligations to keep a rental unit maintained. And one of the requirements of that section, that statute, is that the landlord keeps the house or the apartment code compliant. It has to meet all the requirements of the housing or building code. If the landlord fails to do that, then another section, KRS 383.625, gives the tenant a certain remedy. And the remedy is they can give the landlord a notice that specifies the problem and tells the landlord, if it's not fixed in 14 days, then I'm terminating the lease and walking away free and clear of any further obligation in 30 days. Okay? So if a landlord's not meeting his obligation to the tenant has a remedy to give notice for the problem to be fixed. And if it's not fixed, the tenant can move out and walk away, find new housing. Okay? So between those two remedies, the city's ability to fine, lien, and foreclose upon negligent landlords, property owners, and the tenant's ability to give notice and then walk away from negligent landlords and property owners, our law, as written, currently provides everything that we need to address those horror stories where tenants are living in a property that is not being taken care of. So I think that we have everything that we need right now to address the problems. But the secret is that many times the tenants don't want the problems fixed. Now, why would that be? And here's why. They're living in a property that is perhaps old. And because it's old and because it's not in great shape, they get to live there significantly below market value. Perhaps the market value would be $750, $850 for their unit, But because the unit's old, because it's not in great shape, they get to live there for $400. Well, they know that if they were to move out and go somewhere else, they would be forced to pay that $750, $850 rate. They don't want to do that. Perhaps they can't afford that. And so they're content to stay in their $300, $400 unit. Well, the problem arises when someone else buys that property. Okay, an investor buys that property and they decide, I'm going to fix it up because I think we could really have something nice here. And so they pour thousands of dollars into the property, fix it up, new appliances, new systems. But when they do that, they are forced to raise the rent. Okay, because remember, owning rental property is a business. Okay, the goal is to profit from the business. And so they're going to raise the rent. And so that's where you see lots of the tenants complaining, is that their rent is being raised. Well, the rent only gets raised up to market value, because if someone charges more than the market will allow, no one's going to rent and pay that rate. So what happens is that an investor puts money into the property and they fix the property up, they make it nicer, they make it code compliant, but then the rent gets increased and the existing tenants are not happy. Now, everybody understands that, but that is part of our economy, and that's part of keeping our housing situation in Lexington from having a number of houses that are not code compliant and not in habitable condition. So we have the remedies that we need under existing law to address the concerns that are being raised by these tenants. So those are local issues. Statewide, we're in the new year, and so the General Assembly is back in session, and the usual suspects in Frankfort are pushing more anti-landlord agenda. Representative Kulkarni out of Louisville has again introduced another bill that similar to what she introduced last year, regarding landlord being required to store and give notice of any abandoned tenant property after a tenant has left the rental unit. Again, just fraught with peril, these bills that she's bringing forward. I expect more of them to come. The good news is that there is very little chance this year, just like last year, very little chance that they will move forward in our General Assembly. But in any event, we'll keep an eye on those bills and keep you informed. So those are kind of the three updates that I have. Lexington's rental assistance program no longer has the waiting period, no longer has the 30-day notice requirement. The tenants' bill of rights issues are going to be addressed by the new council, and so we'll want to keep an eye on those, perhaps attend some meetings. Be sure to speak with your council member. Be sure to email them, let them know your thoughts on these ideas, because bottom line, lots of things sound good when you've heard one side of the story, but when you further understand the process, they don't make a lot of sense. And typically when we create new law, there are tons of unintended consequences. So the better move is to stick to the laws that we already have and make sure that they get enforced aggressively, and that the public gets educated about how they can use them to their benefit. And then finally, keeping an eye on the General Assembly and any legislation or proposed legislation that would impact the rental industry there. So that's my update for today. Again, if you need help with any of this stuff, you can reach out to me via email, smarshall@trippleslaw.com or 859-685-0035. Hope 2023 is off to a fantastic start for you. Have a great day and great rest of your week.